I received Social Security. And, you know, that we didn't get a cost of increase this year because they said that there really wasn't a need for it, which was completely untrue. So for me, I know this is about inflation, but my savings, part of my savings besides whatever my family would leave me was, I've been working since 1963, and Social Security was what I was relying on in my older years, as I'm getting older now. So, you know, it seems to me if what I have and what I'm receiving now is going, in inflation, is going to be less and worth less as time goes by, is the government going to do anything about that? You know, in other words, so if I'm making, you know, $100 a month and it's really worth $50, what happens to me?
I don't think the government will do anything about it. So, you know, as we said earlier in the conversation, savers, as they enter retirement years, are historically been very vulnerable to inflation. The illusion that we've been operating under is that Social Security is inflation indexed. But, and this goes back to what Sean was saying earlier and others, the distortion of inflation numbers in the government, you know, the way they recalculated and stripped it out, et cetera, has made the CPI not the real inflation number. And I was looking the other day at the price of, there's some index for the price of a pound of whole wheat bread. And it tracks CPI perfectly. So you can say, great. Okay, so that would be an argument that CPI is a reflection. But of course, that's not what everyone in retirement is doing with the entirety of their Social Security check, as delicious as that whole wheat bread in the plastic bag is. So, you know, I think that what the government is doing is manipulating the CPI statistics because they're afraid of their inflation-indexed entitlements. And if they're already doing that, when it gets really to be an acute crisis, I see no reason why they won't take it to the extreme.
And Medicare, they take that now out of Social Security, and it just seems like, you know, basically we're getting screwed.
Right. So inflation.
What do we do about that?
Inflation, and this goes back to Sean's point. I'm very afraid of inflation. I think it's very, very destructive. You know, but for the project of getting thrift going, whether it's a project in Kansas or the project generally, I don't think inflation is, you know, necessarily the immediate threat, but the consequences you talk about are why it's unjust to allow inflation to take hold for savers.
But you're suggesting even very moderate rates of that, if that gap is 2% difference or 3% difference between what you should have gotten and what you received, it's painful. Yeah. It's not a... Yeah.
At 62, you could make a certain amount and pay the government $1 for $1. Then they said when you were 65, you could make $35,000 instead of $15,000. They changed that and never told anybody. So then, to be 66, you're still paying $1 for $1. Mm-hmm. And now they're raising the rate for people who are getting older. You can't retire at 66, at 67. But for me, you know, it makes me angry because the number one point for me is, that's my money. That's my money, not the government's. That's the money I put to support this government.
And I think when Barbara talks about thrift, it ultimately comes back to that self-reliance and that control of your own circumstances. So savings in the form of a government pension like Social Security don't have all the right characteristics of savings. Some of them, and that they don't have all of them, which is the control over, you know, what happens with your own money. It is your money, but you just can't have it.
Yeah, and my assistant is wondering whether he should work for a company so they can get Social Security, and I said, you know what, I don't think it's really going to be worth anything by the time you get old. So stick with me.
Do either of the two of you have anything you want to close with, or have you had an opportunity to?
Well, I was thinking of one thing I kind of want to call on Shal for this, because I've been, you know, we're talking about unthrifty Americans, and Sean, you suggested this too in one of your questions, at least one of the questions you thought you might ask. Have we ever had a culture of thrift? And if so, when? And so I've been trying to identify the dates, periodize it. And so here's my guess, and I want to know what you think. Something like from the late 19th century through 1960, we could institutionally say that we had a culture of thrift, that people were encouraged to save, took pride in saving, understood some of the broader ethical values of thrift, and then after that time it began to fade away. What would you say to that?
Almost. I don't think late 19th century, early 20th would do it, because in 1910, most Americans did not have a savings account.
But there was a thrift
There was a
movement.
You know, it's uneven. If you were in Massachusetts...
But it was increasing rapidly.
Yes, I mean, from about 1918, people started to have bank accounts in commercial banks. And the problem, as you know, is we didn't have many savings banks, so that they were regionally
Credit
confined.
union movement.
Well, that was pretty small. Credit union, very small in America, not a big impact. However, the golden age of thrift is remarkably late. It starts in World War II when you have savings bonds spread widely. You have thrift education, almost all schools, and the golden age of thrift goes from about 1940 or 41 to sometime in the 1980s. So it's very recent. And I know David may not agree with that.
Well,
it's not Benjamin Franklin.
Here's my rationale. We saw an almost complete shutdown of anti-thrifts beginning in the late 19th century up until about 1960 or 70. There were reforms against usury laws. The lottery completely shut down. There wasn't a single lottery in the country. And credit cards hadn't really been discovered except for the business class. So those things
I agree with that. I mean, of course, there's nothing that can compare historically to the tremendous expansion of credit in this country after 1980, I would say.
We're good.
That's
okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. I think we've...
Thank you.